You know, I already cover how to release low back pain associated with insomnia, and I cover how to release low back pain associated with the psoas major, which is associated with infertility and sterility. And so you need to check those training courses to see how to do those techniques. But these are all the other muscles that can cause low back pain that are not those that I've listed. So here it is. There are other muscles besides these muscles that cause low back pain. Other muscles including the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a huge muscle. We don't think about it going to the low back, but the crest of the diaphragm originates from the lumbar spine. So sometimes you have to release the diaphragm in order to release low back pain. Pressing up into its billowy shape, you will be met with resistance. By pressing into the resistance of the diaphragm, slowly increase your pressure, slowly back your pressure out after that to encourage the release in yin mode. And by doing yang and yin release pulses throughout the ceiling of the diaphragm on the left side, on the right side, and especially kind of going in under the sternal area, you can get the crest attachments of the diaphragm to begin to release. And then using the intestines to actually push on the diaphragm where it descends back towards the lumbar spine, you can get some release that way also. It's kind of like doing a pressure point release through a phone book. In releaseology for the upper torso, we talked about how the diaphragm can pinch the esophagus and cause acid reflux and trouble like heartburn and so on. But the esophagus is not the only thing that goes through the diaphragm. Also, the descending aorta goes through the diaphragm, through the aortal hiatus, and on the way it can get pinched by the diaphragm, and I think that can affect the blood pressure going through the diaphragm and make that navel knot tense up even more. So let's show you the another group of muscles. This is the first erector spinae muscle we're going to go over. And the erector spinae are the large spinal muscles that span the torso. And I'm just going to show you the techniques for the lower part. This lower part is called the sacrospinalis. It's actually the confluence of all three of the sinews of the erector spinae just before it attaches to the sacrum. And it can get really thick right where it attaches to the sacrum, and you really have to apply sustained, steady pressure on that sacrum to get those fibers to release. And a lot of times you have to release the attachments up onto the vertebrae and ribs, to get the spinalis sinew first as the central band of the sacrospinalis, and then start working on what I'll call the longissimus thoracis. The longissimus thoracis begins at the sacrospinalis, and it, you can see in this picture, it comes up and it attaches to all the ribs and all the vertebra, all the way up to the top of the thoracic spine. But it can definitely cause low back pain because of its pathway across the low back. So you might need to release the whole thing on occasion to help people that are having lower torso pain in the back. And remember that the nerves that come out of the thoracic spine all have to come out between the thoracic vertebra. And this muscle, when it's really in spasm, it could actually put undue tension on any of the inner vertebral joints along the spine, and it can knock any of the ribs out of place. It's very strong. So it's called longissimus because it's the longest of all three of the different sinews. The longissimus thoracis always gives me the feeling that it's mounding up the rib cage. So it kind of pulls the rib cage up and creates this curve. And I always get the sensation that I just want to flatten that thing out. So I just find the middle of the tension in this muscle, and I just press straight down into the table, kind of like flattening their spine out, which lengthens them towards their head, really. You have a small vector in that direction, but a lot of it is just going straight into it and flattening it out. And pressure in this area also feels really good, by the way. So just go into it. Right now I'm demonstrating just kind of how to stretch, but here we go. The best thing to do is just go straight into it and just nail it. Straight down into the table, flattening it out, and give it a lot of pressure. You want to do sustained pressure for at least a minute. It'll feel great. I'm sorry I'm moving around here, but the idea is to hold it for like a minute. Slowly back your pressure out once you've been pressing into it for about a minute. I call that yang mode when you're pressing into it. And then switch to yin mode where you slowly back your pressure out and try to encourage a release. When you feel it start to melt, you'll feel energy go through your body to the ground, and you'll feel all the spinal muscles lengthen out. You'll feel like the tailbone and the head drift away from each other as this longissimus thoracis releases. So try these techniques. If someone is suffering from low back pain that is actually caused by a spinal muscle, it probably is this longissimus thoracis muscle causing it, because it's got to be the strongest out of all the erector spinae muscles. The other options, remember, in the low back are muscles that we've already gone over, the serratus posterior, inferior, and also the psoas major in the front usually is actually the main cause of low back pain. But you have to check these muscles in the back just to make sure, because if they're tight, they can cause an achy feeling and definitely pull vertebrae out of place. And the longissimus thoracis, this muscle is the thickest out of all the spinal muscles. And it sure is long, huh? Comes all the way from the sacrum all the way up onto the back of the ribs. Okay, let's do this for a couple more minutes, and I'll show you the iliocostalis. Remember, there are three erector spinae bands: the spinalis, the longissimus, and the iliocostalis. The spinalis because it attaches to the spinous process of the vertebra. The longissimus is called longissimus because it's the longest of the three. And the iliocostalis is called the iliocostalis because it basically travels the pathway between the ilium and the costals. Costals means ribs, so costillas in Spanish, I think, and costalis in Latin. So iliocostalis. Let's check the lower portion of the iliocostalis. It's, well, the very bottom is iliocostalis lumborum, but this is the iliocostalis thoracis, which does attach to the lower ribs. And this is a lower torso section we're working on. So you might have to release this most outer lateral band of the erector spinae, the iliocostalis thoracis. Like I said, this is a section up on the rib cage. And basically what you want to do is you want to try to traction the ribs up towards the head, towards the top of the rib cage is the direction that you're stretching in. Remember, the ribs are like bucket handles, and so you're sort of like trying to lift the bucket handle up and out while you're doing a slow pressure point release on each of the pressure points that you're finding. There's it attaches to like 6 different vertebrae through the lower section here of the thorax of the rib cage. So you can stop on each of them for maybe like 20 to 30 seconds each. Intensify your pressure while you're holding the stretch, and then try to trigger the release by slowly backing your pressure out. I know I'm jumping around in my demonstration, but you get the idea. Okay, so let's show you the iliocostalis lumborum next. The iliocostalis lumborum attaches to the lumbar section. Here's a really great picture. You can see how all the nerves come out between the ribs. Those are called intercostal nerves. And you can see the spinal nerves coming out into the lumbar section below that. Sorry, on to the next thing with the video here. So position yourself so you're pushing from the ground using a good stance, kind of a martial arts stance. Use your whole body so you're not really squeezing with your hands at all, but you're keeping your hands and your wrists relatively aligned. And what you're doing is you're trying to get in to the iliocostalis lumborum, the most outer rector spinae sinew, and lift the lower rib cage while you're stretching that muscle. Stretching while you're intensifying pressure into the points, and then slowly back your pressure out and see if you can trigger a release. When you trigger release in the iliocostalis lumborum, you'll feel the lower rib cage relax, and you'll feel space open up between it, the lower rib cage, and the sacrum. Or not the sacrum, but the ilium actually, because the iliocostalis actually does attach to the ilium and not the sacrum. The other, the spinalis and the longissimus sinews of the erector spinae do attach to the sacrum, but the iliocostalis attaches to the ilium. So let me go and press on the actual attachment on the ilium here. So I'm definitely using my stance. This is a very strong muscle, and I'm stretching her whole hip down away from the weight of her thorax while I'm doing this, and just kind of keeping balance with my outside hand there. To repeatedly do a yin-yin pulse until it releases. Okay, let's show you the levator costae muscles. The levator costae muscles are a series of muscles that are mostly in the upper torso, so I'm only going to show you a couple of the lower points, but the idea is to stretch the ribs down from the spine with these muscles because they lift the ribs. So what you want to do is press into them and stretch away from the spine at the same time. So yang yin pulses into those. Now let's show you the muscles from a different angle. So same muscles. What you do is you can use one hand to maneuver the ribs, and the other hand, goes in and fishes around with your fingertips for those muscles, and that's where the hand that you're gonna do the pressure points with. So I'm just kind of checking around to see which of the levator costia muscles are actually tight and which ones aren't. And I found a tight one. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and do a yang yin pulse on this levator costia muscle. Okay, this one, let's do it. Focus your attention in, your pressure and your energy into the center of the release point until you're there. Okay, I'm there. Stretching, bracing with the other hand. Now let's focus my pressure, pressing harder and harder into the muscle and pulling back and doing a slow release. That triggers the yin phase when you slowly back your pressure out. So, you're pushing all the way from your stance on the ground all the way through your body into your fingertips to apply the yang mode. And then when you slowly back your pressure out, you're like very slowly making it feel like you're back out even though you don't go anywhere. Like after a minute, you're still, holding the pressure sometimes and making it still feel like you're backing out. So can you do those at the same time? Use a lot of pressure and make it feel like you back out for as long as possible. That's the trick. And you want to do it with each of these muscles, and you want to do each of them until they let go completely. Okay, let's show you the bigger brother of the levator costae muscles. They're called the levator costarum. I'm getting into really fine detail. Probably a lot of people wouldn't believe I'm even demonstrating releasing these muscles because they're kind of a random muscle, but they can be involved with pain in the lower torso because they can offset a rib just through the lower three false ribs. The idea is that they're anchored on ribs above, and they lift the ribs below, and it can cause kind of a bevel sensation between the ribs. So if you feel that offsetting of the ribs through these lower sections of ribs, then what you do is you stretch the lower rib away, down and away to like traction it from the rib above. It's really hard to hurt a tight muscle by pressing on it because muscles are tough. So just make sure you're on a muscle and you can press very firmly. Just make sure you're not pressing on anything else, and have a slight trajectory going out, and you'll feel the muscle get tight like a tight rubber band under your thumb. And what you do is you focus energy in, focus pressure in, hold your balance, wait until it feels like it wants to melt, and then slowly back your pressure out, triggering a release. And you do that with each of the levator costarum muscles until they release all the way. And this really opens up the breathing, by the way. These muscles will restrict breathing for sure if someone's been exercising really hard and strained their their ribs by breathing really hard, or just have a tight rib cage and it feels like rough breathing because one has tight ribs. So we basically made our way through all the techniques for releasing low back pain, haven't we? So there is one other kind of low back vicinity pain that people can get, and it's called sacroiliac pain. So the bottom vertebra, or not the very bottom, the bottom vertebra are actually the coccyx, but above the coccyx is the sacrum. It's a triangle bone kind of between the butt cheeks, and off to each side of that are the ilium bones. The ilium bones are the hip bones, and the sacroiliac joint is the joint between the two. So what can lift the ilium up out of place? Well, the strongest muscle attached to the top of the ilium is actually the latissimus dorsi. The latissimus dorsi attaches to the arm on one side, and in anatomy we think of it as being an anchor to pull the arm down using the contraction of the latissimus dorsi. But besides pulling the arm down, it actually gives a little tug in an upward direction on the ilium. So it pulls the ilium up towards the head a little bit. So you can see how I'm gathering the muscle a little bit under the scapula. It's a big giant muscle, so to release it, what you want to do is gather it up from the side of the low back and pull the fibers towards the armpit. And first you might need to massage a little bit the way I'm doing to really feel where the tight fibers are. But once you focus in on which bundle of fibers in the latissimus dorsi are tight, go ahead and try to establish a stretch. When you establish a stretch, use your fingers in kind of a phalanx-like position and penetrate into the points. And hold the muscle tight. Hold your points up. Boy, I'm taking forever to get a good position here. I'm sorry. Let me see. Okay, that works. So, pressure point release. The latissimus dorsi attaches to the bottom of the scapula here, so it's a good place for it to not slip. Okay, good yang. I've got the stretch going. I can feel it stretching all the way from almost like the tailbone and the ilium for sure. And then slowly backing out to do release. Let me try it again. So slowly building my pressure. It's a yang cycle, I call it. You can feel like you're pulling your pressure out, even though you don't really go anywhere after like 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And see if you can trigger a release. So make it feel like you're backing out even though you don't go anywhere, and you're stretching it, that big latissimus dorsi muscle up from the ilium. Maintain that stretch. Really hold it. Feel the fibers stretching up from the ilium. And then as you release, feel like it's releasing back down to the hip bone, to the ilium. And you see what that does. When you release it completely, it releases the ilium, and the pressure on the ilium can release the top of the ilium, and it can allow the sacrum and the ilium to realign by doing that. And that's the whole idea of showing you the latissimus dorsi technique for the lower torso. I know it's not necessarily thought of as a lower torso muscle, but it definitely causes low back pain, and it can definitely offset the sacroiliac joint. So whenever someone has low back pain, release the latissimus dorsi. If the sacroiliac joint is not lining up the right way, release the latissimus dorsi muscle. Okay. So that covers all the release techniques for all the other muscles that can cause low back pain besides the psoas major and the serratus posterior inferior. So give them a shot, try all the techniques, and definitely go through the memorization exercises for each of them, and try to actually work on somebody that has low back pain. And if these techniques don't work, then you need to try the serratus posterior inferior or the psoas major techniques as well. Okay, thanks. Catch you on the next video.